welcome to Anatomical Gangster. I am your host, Sue Hitzmann. If you're new to my podcast, make sure that you click the subscribe button and follow me on social media. And if you love one of my conversations, please share this podcast with your friends and support the podcast. I'd really appreciate that. Today, I had the pleasure of chatting with one of my favorite humans on the planet, Dr. Carol Davis, about her career and her perspectives of fascia, form, function, and what's kind of missing in our traditional anatomical schools of thought. I've had many conversations with Carol, and every time I talk to her, I learn something new every single time she shares some of her incredible education and wisdom. Carol is Professor Emerita in the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. She's an author and editor of numerous manuscripts and books, including Integrative Therapies in Rehabilitation, Evidence of Efficacy in Therapy Prevention and Wellness. And one of my favorite books of hers called The Patient-Practitioner Interaction, an experiential manual for developing the art of patient care. This was one part of our conversation that really hit home because as a therapist, creating rapport with your clients, having keen listening skills, and allowing the client to be the leader to their own healing, not the other way around, is just not a skill. It's in so many ways an art form. So in addition to her doctorate in physical therapy from Massachusetts General Hospital Institute of Healthcare Professions, she has a doctorate in humanistic studies from Boston University. So again, her wisdom is always illuminating and brings curious fascination to any topic based on the human experience. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Carol Davis. I guess where I'd love to start this conversation is where, before you were a professor, what got you there? Where, what was happening when you were younger? Was there something originally that fascinated with you about the human body or nature? Or where's the start for Carol Davis, who has now become such an iconic educator of the industry, who really spans cellular science and can speak so well to all of these aspects of human biology?
Well, I think it starts when I was born. And when I finally kind of got it that I was born outside the bell curve, in that I was born an identical twin. And I had this other person who looked like me. And then we found out that we were, as we got older, we were very similar, not only in the things that we preferred, but in our values and our deep desire and kind of quirky kind of things. I think the really biggest one was when I was in college. My sister and I was in grad school, and my sister and I were in two different cities, and she bought a coat on the same day that I bought a coat, and it was the same coat. And so we found out later, talking to each other, about this neat new coat that I found for winter. And we were just kind of in awe of that. And then the big physiological change is that when she got pregnant, and this is when I was already on the faculty at Birmingham, she got pregnant in 1977 with Jonathan. And I stopped being able to drink coffee, and I love coffee. And she called long distance. She was in Madison, Wisconsin, getting her master's in nursing. And she said, guess what? She said, I'm pregnant. And I said, oh, I said, is that okay with you and Bill? And she said, yeah. We pulled the IUD. I said, well, how did you know you're pregnant? She said, well, I skipped a period and my breast got tender, but mostly I stopped being able to drink coffee.
So crazy, right? I mean, right there, isn't that so fascinating to be a twin, right? To realize that there's all these quirkiness of it, right?
And I was curious, and I was studying science. I was an applied scientist. I was a clinician, and I really wanted to be a clinician. I was good at other things, so people asked me to come fix things. They come fix this clinical education program and teach TheraX because you understand PNF. And I was curious all through PT school. I was curious about why it was taught that way. And I wasn't an easy learner. I didn't just passively accept. Why are we doing exercises in ways that we don't move? And then, of course, I got curious about people who were doing exercises in ways we did move. I explored proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, PNF, diagonal spiral planes. Then I
Love
went
it.
out to Chicago and studied with Dorothy Voss, and
Mhm.
I learned what made sense to me. So I think that a short answer to your really good question is what makes me me is I get very curious about why things are the way they are, and I want to understand what does science have to say about that. And I didn't know at the time, but I was putting together pieces that didn't all fit. And but I when I'd learn something new, like PNF, and I'd apply my neurophysiology and neuroanatomy that I got in my master's program, and I taught PNF from neurophysiology and neuroanatomy point of view. And people seemed to like that. And then my dad became ill with cancer and was hospitalized and was on a clinical trial. We lived in a little town in Pennsylvania, Williamsport, in the mountains, and the closest center was either Sloan Kettering in New York City or Buffalo. And we we decided on Roswell Park, Buffalo, and Dad went up and got and enrolled in a clinical trial. He had cancer of the larynx and pharynx, and he had a laryngectomy and lost his voice. Well, my dad was a great um, humor guy. He was a journalist. He was a writer, and he was an editor of a paper, and he his stock in trade was being able to write well, but also being able to capture people's attention and imagination through his humor. Very quick-witted, um, and he lost his voice, and I watched him become someone that I didn't even know. He became Johnny. My father, editor of a newspaper, became Johnny, and um, I couldn't imagine why these healthcare workers were treating him the way they were, and it was because they didn't know him, and he was uncomfortable, and um, he needed dressing changes, and they didn't. If they when they got to him, they got to him, and he would complain, and then of course they got to him even later, and I would go visit, and I'd watch this dynamic. And one time I was sitting in the solarian with him, and a nurse walked in very officiously, and he kind of did that. I said, "Oh, what was that? You had a response." And he wrote on his slate because he no longer had a voice. I stay out of her way. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I got short of breath, um, and I put the bell on, and I started to panic. And she came into the room, and I couldn't breathe. And she took the face mask and she threw it at me and said, 'If you weren't up and around so much, you wouldn't get short of breath.'" And then I began to realize there's something very wrong here.
Yeah.
And I was I was curious. What are the roots of compassion? How do people who go into healthcare
Mhm.
turn into people who can do something like that? Now, Dad was dealing with it, but
Mhm.
I was shocked by it. And I said, "I want to know more." And I said, "Well, science isn't going to tell me more."
Yeah.
So I thought, well, this has something to do with empathy. And of course, that curiosity about my sister as well has a kind of an empathy feel to it. So I found a curriculum at Boston University in humanistic studies. And I went back with the idea of looking at what are the roots of compassion and how do we teach in such a way that students never lose that desire, that
That's
humanistic
it.
desire.
Yeah.
And even in when they're tired, they don't allow something to take over. And so I did a dissertation on empathy. It was a 5-year doctoral degree, and I wrote a phenomenological description of empathy as it occurs within physical therapists for their patients.
Mm,
Of course, I had to take all the coursework. I had to take phenomenology, and I had to take statistics again, and I had to take um, ethnography because it was a descriptive study. And then I got all the flack from my colleagues. What are you writing a descriptive study for? We need to
that's
count,
right.
do this
Right.
randomized trials.
Right.
I just went and did my own thing.
But Carol, I mean, I think you're hitting on a topic here that and it really resonates with me because, you just always, you are so compassionate. And some of the things you had said that sometimes we, especially if you have a science mind, right? Like science validates things or science gives us ideas. And I think that there's a big conglomerate of human beings who, if you don't have a scientific study, a double blind placebo, whatever, then it's not valid. But in my years of looking at other people's research, there's actually a lot of research that's out there that are trying to sway people from doing things. And that's somewhat frustrating, right? That they're, like there was, I'll give an example, there was a blog that came out that said alternative therapies don't work. Like that was the statement. Alternative therapies don't work. And then they go on to say, we've researched, chiropractic and this and that, and there's no valid studies in these things. And so don't waste your money on any of these things. And I think to myself, okay, so I just want to be clear that what you're saying is that there's all of the massage therapists, body workers, cranial sacral, visceral manipulation, lymphatic drainage, chiropractic, acupuncturists, Reiki, healer, all these people are a sham. There's just millions of therapists and they're all bullshitting everybody and none of this is true because science says so. And so I wonder, how do we find our way from a knowing to a fact? Like, I don't need to have a scientific research study that says if I jump out of an airplane with or without a parachute, my chances of survival are going to be greater if I have a parachute on, but there's no scientific evidence that says this thing, but I know that it's true, right? So how do we get to a place where I think we're understanding that science may or may not actually be able to answer everything. And what I see in neuroscience, all of the atomic force microscopy that we're using, there's all these advances. But then when you look on the other side and you look at psychology, it's like as if it died in the 60s and no one's gone any further into truly studying the brain, except for perhaps like Dr. Amen, who's really looking at brain scans. But it's such a small amount of people. How does psychology work in the concepts of emotion, of compassion, and how do you create clinical research in that? I mean, like, is it possible? Is it necessary?
Yeah, no, it's being done. What we have to do is change the way we're measuring. Randomized trials are not good ways to understand what works with people.
Right.
It's great for drugs. It's great for things that are easily controlled. The variables are easily controlled, but you can't control the variables of people, either therapist or patient, to make them all reliable and valid in the way that Sackett's golden rules suggest that the highest form, randomized, double-blind, placebo-based trial. Um, you you have to change your focus. Well, if you want to measure change and want to see if what you've done has brought about a change that you can measure, you've got to find a different way of measuring besides a randomized trial. And you got to look not at groups, but at cells, at changes in cells. And so along comes Bud Craig. And Bud Craig says, I want to know more about this insula and this emotional nervous system. I can track, I can track the neurons coming in from the free nerve endings, going up the spinal thalamic tract, and then going into the thalamus. And some of them go to the motor cortex, but some of them go off to the side. What's that about? And then we get functional MRI, and we watch, and PET scans, and we watch, and then we correlate. Wait, there are changes that are happening down here that we can measure. Oh, that's autonomic nervous system. That's a change in calcium content, but the insulin doesn't have to respond to that, so that'll go to the dorsal insulin. No big problem. But if there's an emotion associated with it, anterior insula seems to be lighting up there.
Right.
And so does the amygdala, and so does the hippocampus. Oh, well, we've got 3 areas of the brain now that are associated with free nerve endings and things picking up from the inside of us in the autonomic nervous system that seem to be making a difference. Okay, well, let's do a study. Let's do a study of putting a person on a table. Now, what do we want? First of all, what we want is recognize that most people come to us in sympathetic overload. And sympathetic parasympathetic is a binary system. If your sympathetic's high, your parasympathetic's low. And so if you want to get sympathetic down, which is hyper excitable, fight, flight, you want to get it down and agitated with pain. You want to get it down. You got to think about raising the parasympathetic up. So how do you do that? Well, what do we know about parasympathetic? Well, we know that there are ways that we can affect parasympathetic response through tone of voice, through lighting, through color, through putting the patient in charge, through asking questions and listening carefully, through soft touch, through saying you're in charge, through focus. And then the Saratelli study, focusing your attention on your hands and with the intention of wanting to help, focusing your attention and then measuring by fMRI what's the change in the insula. And the change is a diminishment of sympathetic and an elevation of parasympathetic.
Yeah, and I want to point out, and I don't know if everybody knows this, but you had sent me the patient practitioner interaction, and I thought that this was really about helping to develop the art of manual therapy in clinical care, in anything, right? In healthcare. And this idea of communicating, right? That I think there is a skill of being a practitioner, and we sort of had talked a little bit about this before we kind of did the recording of the fact that being a good listener and really be present and listening to what your client is telling you, and then to be able to be a question asker instead of a fixer. I've always I would say, right, a facilitator. And I think there's something to be said about the coming into your practice. I think I've gone into a session with a kind of a new body worker. Actually, I'm here in Florida now, right? So I found this person and said, "Oh, I'm going to come in." And as soon as I got there, she was like, "Oh, I just need 5 minutes. I've had this, that, and the other thing." And she was like running around and telling me about whatever it was. And I just remember thinking to myself, "Why is she telling me this? Like, what? I mean,
wow.
I don't even." And so kind of like sort of told me all about her stressful day. And I was like, I do not want this person touching my body. She's not grounded. And so just before, she was like, "Okay, so tell me a little bit about you." And I just went, maybe we could just breathe here together for just a minute. Let's just bring your energy down and see if we can settle you down before you work on me. I think that would be a nice place to start. And she was like, "Oh, like, wow." And then I think it amplified her stress more, So I think there's something to be said, because I don't think that in any of the years of really being in practice that someone teaches you this so much. I think it's either you learn it or you have, or you find a book like this where it kind of suggests some of these practical opportunities for you to, exercise your listening skills before your action skills, right? So I think there's maybe that stepping stone. So if you had to give someone who is perhaps like a new practitioner, or someone who is maybe they're years into it, what is maybe a real engagement, an exercise to practice to create a better interaction between your clients and yourself?
Well, that book, and you have the second edition, it's now in the seventh edition. It's the seventh edition is coming
Amazing.
out. That book came out of that dissertation and that experience I had at Roswell with
And
my colleague,
the first edition was when?
1988.
Yeah. And it's still just as relevant today.
Well, it's more because we put
More.
in material on Gen X's, and we put in the material of dealing with death and what if somebody comes on to you sexually, and religion. What if somebody wants you to pray with them and you feel uncomfortable about it? It's all the situations you find yourself in that you
Hmm.
never learned in school.
That's
And so
right.
I use this as a course manual, and there are exercises in there for the students to fill out, and they keep a journal. They get to know themselves better, and they get to know that their communication skills and their listening skills through a semester of work,
Hmm.
getting feedback from their classmates, not just me. We do a lot of small group work. So every university I ever was a part of had that course, and I taught that course, and that book just became the textbook that they had. So students at Boston University, University of Alabama, and then University of Miami all had this course. Many of them dismissed it as being not that important. I got long letters afterwards. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have been listening.
It's
You're
so
right.
important.
This is the heart of practice." And so I think at the core of it, Sue, is a willingness to be in the moment
Hmm.
and to put the patient in charge.
Hmm.
We go in thinking we've got to live up to some sense of, oh, well, this person's paying for me to help them. We've got to live up to some sort of image of fixer, as you said. As soon as we get down on the same level, and this is not unique to physical therapy, it's a very psychological. Carl Rogers first introduced it,
Hmm.
um, in his work. As soon as you put yourself on the same level and you say, we're going to have an experience together, and I'm going to bring everything to it that I can to try to help us figure out what's going on here that's causing the reason that you came to me.
Right.
And then together, you and I are going to find ways that work for you through manual therapy, for in my instance, through manual therapy, and then through movement. And
Relationship, right?
it's
Relationship.
the relationship.
Right.
And then it's doing your analysis, doing your diagnosis. PTs have a lot of diagnostic skills. And we read the literature and we know the science. Non-specific low back pain. This person's this age, and they immediately start putting them into categories. No, 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 no. Stay present. Stay
Hmm.
in the moment. Watch them move. Watch how they're holding themselves. And then in my sense, I start looking at where is the fascia speaking to me as they walk, as they stand. I have them stand in front of a mirror and I have a laser. We looked at where the fascia is pulling the head off to the side, or the thorax is a little twisted. Isn't that interesting? Can you feel that? No, I can't feel it. Can you see it? Yeah, I can see it. Okay, good. Then we get on the table, and then out of gravity, something completely different shows up.
Right.
At that moment, I know from my diagnosis, I know what I saw before, my diagnostic analysis. I drop down from my left brain, cognitive brain, into my center. And I quietly center myself and recognize that I've been given permission to enter this field. And I'm very cognizant of the field around my patient and aware that I'm entering the field very respectfully
Hmm.
with a listening mode, a listening stance.
Yeah.
I place my hands, I let them sink down softly, and I wait, and then I
Blending.
and then
Blend.
I and then I take the slack out, just like House taught.
Yep.
And this is Barnes now, but I'm following Barnes' principles here. And then I take the slack out and then I wait and I listen. And I listen for this, for fascia to start moving, to unwinding. It's a very light touch. If you're too heavy, you can't feel it.
Mhm.
And I'm respectful and I don't let my mind wander. Now, of course, my mind will wander a little bit, but I bring it back. What's happening between my hands?
Mhm.
And in that posture, in that listening mode, the patient and I come into, in my opinion, and the bioenergy resonance people that are now doing the studies, Shamini Jen is one, Institute of Noetic Sciences. These are the folks that are trying to measure this. Very difficult to measure because you need the technology that will get energy waves resonating with one another. We can do that through fMRI and to some extent flow through PET scans. But what we're trying to do is analyze how I can be in sync. And there's that empathy, there's that resonance, how I can be in sync and with my own totally personal belief. There are a lot of people who believe this, a lot of people who don't, more people don't, that the healthier I am, the more positive I am, the more my intention is to help without worrying about objectivity and worrying about outcomes. Just being curious. Be
Yeah.
a curious cat. Just be in the moment and be curious. You and I've talked about that. You do that too.
Mhm.
In the moment, being curious. What's happening here? And then listening. And there's a kind of communication that takes place. I
This.
can't explain it. We call it clinical intuition. All clinicians have it, but they don't like to talk about it because nobody's ever found out how that happens.
Yeah.
Science is getting better as we move away from materialism, more into looking at the black box, the dark, the empty spaces where we're only can conjecture what in the world could be going on here. A lot of it is physics, a lot of it is quantum physics. And people get turned off by that idea, quantum physics. I mean, it's subatomic, but nobody's ever seen an electron. No, but we sure have seen the results of what electrons do. And you and I are exhibiting it right now in this video. I'm in Maine, you're in Florida. We're thousands of miles away from each other. And somehow electrons are capturing us in this moment.
That's it.
Not
Yeah.
just the picture,
Yeah.
but
Exactly. There's an
the
energy.
being
I
and
feel it. Yeah, I
exactly.
feel like you're here with me too. You're saying something really important here, and I want to make sure that we talk about this because you've used the word fascia a bunch of times, right? And of course, I've talked to lots of people. We're all in this community, the Fascial Research Society, and there's I think, a curiosity for me on the language that we use in the fascial community. And over the 20 years of really being in this world of research on fascia, you kind of go down a rabbit hole because there's this tissue that connects everything, which is why we call it connective tissue. But now you've got this new knowledge of the fact that there's 250 million sensory nerves living in fascia. So now each at every level, we could call it an organ. The fascia around our viscera could be considered an organ. The superficial fascia on its own could be considered an organ. And then we could also call it a system because of this biotensegrity and this connectivity that the whole entire being of us has integrated. So,
Right.
and you and I have talked about this a lot, and you always have such a great way of bringing the simplicity of the language to the system of fascia, because I feel like oftentimes when I listen to some practitioners, and we even had talked about fascial unwinding, and I said, right, but what is unwinding, right? Are you saying that the tissue is unwinding, or is it the energy in the tissue? Because fascia is a neuroelectrochemical system, and so you're getting a release of chemicals that is creating adaptation. So what's the release that's happening, right? So can you talk a little bit about uh, fascia as a crystal matrix and as a system over being a tissue, and how we get from the myopic view of fascia is just an inert packing material and it's not doing anything, to this idea that fascia is doing something, and it's doing something outside of neurological conduction. It's the nervous system isn't doing something to it, it is reactive to neurological processes.
There's a resonance that's going on there between what's happening on the surface of the skin through the piezo channels down into the nerves, and then the nerves, fascia's beak is sensory in that sense. It's not a nerve, but it's communicating stimuli down to the interstitial nerves, and then it's all one. I put together in response to a Fascia Research Congress a seminar online. Well, what is fascia? And they were doing just what you were doing. Is it a system? Is it connective tissue? And I said, it seems to me that fascia is a system with its own unifying function. And Neil Thies said, if you have a system, it's got to have a function, a unifying function. And I said, the unifying function of fascia is communication.
Amen. That's it.
I think fascia is the living, vibrating crystal matrix system within life forms, not just humans, plants, animals, that unites all systems functionally. Now we're getting away from collagen, elastin, the polysaccharide granules, the anatomy of it. We're talking about function and histology. We're talking about function, which unites all other systems functionally. Communication is the key element that elevates the functional importance of fascia. This communication flow, and this is from Ashman, of information with all systems by way of fascial vibration is also known functionally as the mind. It works to facilitate homeostasis and elevates the importance of fascia to great significance, a hierarchy within a heterarchical system of biotensorial energy flowing within and through the architecture of the fascial system.
So powerful. I mean, it's such a powerful statement. And you're also saying this concept of the mind, right? That where because consciousness and the mind, in my idea or my mind, is
Yeah.
not the same, right? And so, where does consciousness lie in this definition?
Well, that's an age-old question, and many philosophers have have had very express feelings about that, but it usually falls out into one camp. It used to be, the mind creates consciousness. Well, some people still are holding on to that. It's like looking for the announcer inside the radio.
Right,
Um, but um, there are those who hold that consciousness is foundational. Neil Thies calls it the big C,
right.
consciousness as the ground of being, or what we call fundamental awareness. Now, consciousness not only is I'm aware of who I am in this one moment, I can be aware of who I was 10 minutes ago. I can think about actually who I'm going to be in 10 minutes from now, but I can think about thinking about that meta.
Right. The observer in the process of observation of something that's being observed, right? The separation of it, right? That I can't remember one of the swamis had said, um, everything that you are aware of is not consciousness. The the one observing and
Yes,
in the process of observation, that's consciousness. But what you observe, that's not consciousness, right?
yes, yeah. And the idea is consciousness came first.
Right. Everything is born out of consciousness.
Everything's born, and that's one main system.
Yeah.
Another system is, no, we came first and then consciousness. But I hold with consciousness came first. And then I get into real hot water and I say, okay, when?
Right.
And I say, I go to this book and to this philosopher, Journey of the Universe, Brian Swim, and the whole idea of what Richard Rohr calls the Great Radiance. It's also called the Big Bang.
Hmm.
protons and neutrons canceling each other out, except there was one neutron that was left 13.7 billion years ago. And that one, and that was dark energy when they canceled each other out. And then that one neutron that was left exploded. And out of that outward push came the inward push of gravity and electromagnetism and strong and weak nuclear forces.
Mhm.
And so we have all of the energetics in that 13.7 billion years ago moment, that then helium and hydrogen joining together to form the stars, and the different elements then forming the periodic chart of the elements as the atoms came together. And he makes this story that is so beautiful. It's easy to read. It's like a novel.
I'm going to read that one. That
Journey of,
sounds amazing.
or you can, if you're not a reader, you can look at him on YouTube. He's got an hour-long video on
Love that.
Journey of the Universe. And Google asked him to come talk about it. And so the Google talk is also on YouTube. And he talks about it to the Google guys and women. But anyway, this is where I get into hot water, because I believe that outward and inward, what does that remind you of? It reminds you of fascia integrity. It reminds you of biotensegrity. It
Right.
reminds you of the push-pull. It
Yeah.
reminds you of the push out and the pull in. And so Steve Levin kind of holds me at a kind of a distance and says, well, and Susan Lowell said, well, you're the one, Carol, who coined the word biotensegral energy.
Mm.
And I, yes, that is my own individual hypothesis, not anybody else. It's my hypothesis and my terminology that in that moment, that energy got implanted in life forms and in us in such a way that sperm and egg have it already. And when they come together to fertilize that
Right.
embryo, then watch
Th-
that energy.
yeah,
The,
this
D,
part.
the DNA isn't going to
Right.
do. It's the
No.
energy behind the DNA. The DNA is the blueprint, but the energy behind the DNA. Watch how one cell becomes two, becomes
Yeah.
four, becomes six, becomes eight, and then the little limb buds go out, and then the heart goes up, and then the head comes down, and then
Yeah.
the heart comes down, and that energy in it move, keeping our cells open, volume, keeping having us respond, having the muscles respond to keep us from falling forward in response to gravity, and keep our breath going and keep our hearts going and keep the blood coming up from our feet. The heart pump can't do that. That's energy inside of us, dynamic vibrational energy that James Oshman talks about beautifully. And it's with us until the moment we take our last breath.
That's for sure. I mean, and perhaps in some frequency it's there. And I think, you're using these words resonance and frequencies, right? And we are bioresonance, right? We have a frequency to us.
Sure.
And when I look at, chemistry, and you look at the periodic table and realizing that all of the elements all have a frequency of their own,
That's right.
all have a resonance,
Everything
right?
vibrates at a different level.
Exactly. So when I think of the hertz of 440, that's just noise. 440 is noise. Our fascial tissue, ideally, I think resonates below that around 423 hertz. But when it doesn't, if there's not a tone of frequency, if we can't resonate, I think that is what, when people say fascia holds a memory, or fascia is tied to emotional responses, the activation. I think, well, it's hard, there's not a lot of scientific evidence for this, but I think that what's changing is frequency. When you're in fear, you're vibrating at a different frequency than when you're vibrating at love. And when we act in a state of fear, we just mess shit up. But if we act in a state of love, we tend to be able to calm situations down. We can come together. But I think we're in a bit of a world right now where fear is everywhere. And it's not like it's just now. I mean, there's just wars happening. People are against one another for in my mind, the craziest reasons. Like, why are we arguing about these things? But I'm curious with your ability to explain this. Does fascia hold a memory? Do you think that fascia actually possesses the potential for memory, to distend and retract back to its original shape? How does it know to go there? And can our own emotional stability alter the continuity and the communication potential of fascia?
Whoa, what a great question. I don't know. I know what I observe um, with my patients. I know that when I'm doing deep fascial work, especially around the pelvis, emotions can come up. Women who've had cesarean, emergency cesareans, the fear and the tears, and the memory comes up. And is that nervous tissue? Is that captured in the nerves? Is it well, I'm working with the fascia. Yes, 250 million nerves are in that fascia. So there is memory somewhere. And what I do know also is that fascia tends to absorb energy. And when you've had a, a terror, a trauma, a rollover attack, fall out of a tree, got attacked yourself, fell, that energy, that kinetic energy goes into your fascia and gets stored, I believe. And then when you say release, well, what are we releasing?
Right.
The heat and the energy from our hands, we're in those pockets perhaps of the combination of nerve and fascia together. And there's another energy vibration making itself known to that area, softening, as Gerald Pollack says. Yes, softening, melting. Use the word melting.
Mhm.
And what's melting? Well, the condensed gel of the polysaccharide ground substance is softening with the vibration of heat from our pressure and the mechanotransduction and the electrons, and it's crystalline, and the electrons are popping out all over the place, and all of a sudden thixotropy takes place in that piezoelectricity, and it becomes softer. And in that softening, the vibration, the resonance of that particular tissue right there is going to change. And in that change, what are we releasing? Well, you could say that we're releasing stuck potential energy that's stuck there into kinetic energy, into the interoceptors, into the insula. The emotions come up, the memory comes up, and then there's some sort of release, a remembering of sort, a revisiting of sort, which is exactly what empathy is. Empathy happens to us. It's not a memory, it's given to us very quickly by self-transposal, followed by identification, followed by sympathy all together. And in that moment, that experience is given to us, and we think, oh, and you can't make it happen. You can block it from happening if you don't want to feel. You just change your attention, your focus of attention. But if you go with it and you allow it, then you're changed by it. At least that's what the physical therapist said to me in my study of phenomenological description of empathy as it occurs within physical therapists for their patients.
Mhm.
So I did an ethnography, I did an ethnographic study that some would say is not relevant to science. I think it's terribly relevant to what my colleagues and I are experiencing in an emotional, philosophical, psychological way with our patients, but when we can also look at what's happening energetically in resonance with the energy with our patients and the
Yeah.
interoceptive nervous system.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that yeah, I'm so fascinated with sound frequency and sound healing, and we've got this event that we're doing in the summertime at Red Mountain Resort in the middle of these incredible red mountains, and my friend Lloyd Leary, who is a sound healer, is coming.
In
Where
Sedona?
say again?
Is it in Sedona?
No, it's in Ivins, Utah, in St.
Oh,
George, Utah, so about an hour west of Las Vegas,
uh-huh.
and he plays the didgeridoo.
Aha.
Right, one of those, those horns and gongs and singing bowls. And we were having this conversation where, I said, in my experience, when I've had somebody play the didgeridoo, hours after, I can feel my cells
Mhm.
vibrating inside of me still, like I'm vibrating, I'm vibrating, I'm vibrating. And I, and well, what is that? And I say, I think that that is the re-regulation, up-regulation of my parasympathetic system coming back online. That neuroelectrochemical superconducting frequency is in some ways awakening the true root of my frequency, my tone. And I mean, I even wear, this is Nassim Haramehn's, this is a
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
right, and it through and it's magnetic, right? And so I mean, I feel when I wear it, I can feel a regulation of my own balance. If I close my eyes, I feel more set in my body, and I think that it attunes me to the fascial tissue. And you know, I just think for this global system that has, again, neuroelectrochemical conduction to it. It's a communication highway. It is a stability architecture. And it's the only tissue in the entire body that has polyhedric shapes. And when you look at all nature, anything nature, right, is unpredictable. It's like the difference between
Chaos. It's like
exactly
chaos,
chaos, right?
sacred geometry.
Right? You know, particles, that's matter, but waves are possibilities. And when I talked to JC Gumberto, and he says, well, you know, take a look at that non-living matter of your bookshelf and everything is straight lines, but then look at the plants, there's no straight lines in nature. And so the only tissue in the entire body that truly possesses this chaotic frequency and structure that creates polyhedrons, that creates these spaces for communication to occur, is fascia. So it is, I think, perplexing to me that in knowing this and seeing this correlation, and now we have this evidence, we've seen it through atomic force microscopy, that we still have medical doctors and scientists, especially the neurological people, saying it doesn't matter, fascia smasha, just whatever. It's
Oh,
not,
it's only the nerves. It's only the nerves. Yeah.
yeah, it's just the nerves. And it can't possibly be, because if it were just nerves, then really my life really didn't begin until I was born. But I'm quite certain that, as Jaap van der Wal says, I was a process from the moment that that sperm and egg hit. There is a spark of light that is created. And
Yeah.
that is the
Yeah.
spirit, I think, of the frequency of who am I, is that light, that frequency. I think that's what we need to get closer to at some point in our lives, right?
And what a bright light that is.
Indeed, right? I mean, it really is something to be said about that. Now, you've also used words that I don't know if everybody understands, like thixotropy or piezoelectricity. Can you simply define these so that people who are like, that went right over my head, maybe they could understand those words with a little more clarity?
Yeah, sure. We know from Donald Ingber's work in mechanotransduction that when you press on the skin, electrons flow. It's called pressure electricity. Um, and when that happens, you can press on a piezoelectric kind of tissue and light up a light bulb too. It doesn't have to be in the body. It's a substance that when you press on it, electrons flow out of it, and those electrons then are used as an electric source to light a light bulb or whatever. In our bodies, it's that those electrons flow through the soft tissue, the extracellular matrix of fascia. All things in our body are made up of soft matter. Soft matter has the characteristic of when you press on it gently, it becomes um, thinner.
Mhm.
And when you press on it hard, it becomes harder. I mean,
We resist the uptake of pressure.
yes,
Yes,
it's the nature of soft tissue physics.
that's right.
And so when we're pressing gently on the skin of doing manual therapy, or when they're pressing gently into your beautiful roller or balls, pressing gently, then the tissue responds in a friendly way
Mhm.
to open up and allow the electrons to flow through. And then from the very condensed form of matrix, it starts to soften and it gets less stiff, more easily flowing, and allows water fluid into it to hydrate it. And so it changes its nature through the it's bioenergetic flow.
Right.
It's
So what about people who might hear this, who have Ehlers-Danlos or a mixed connective tissue disorder, where they're already like, I don't want anything that's going to soften my tissue because I'm already so loose. And so there I'm always like those are different.
yeah,
Softening and loosening is different, right? I mean, because we can have actually in softer tissue can actually boost elasticity, can it boost
right.
elastic property, right?
That's right. And because so much of the muscle, the myofascia, is overcharged with holding because you're loose in your joints. So you get a kind of an overworking of some tissue.
Hmm.
When when you release the overworked tissue, then it becomes more muscularly healthy, able to do what it needs to do to be able to support and stabilize.
Well said. Yeah. Well said. I mean, I think that's it is when you have Ehlers-Danlos, muscle timing is declined. The communication is lacking, which is why there's not
Yes,
stability around the
that's right.
joints, right?
That's
Yeah. So, that's why weight training is very precarious for them because their fascial tissue just isn't able to hold the joint
right,
together to get the muscles to
right. And
connect.
it's always myofascia. It always is the muscle along with the fascia working together, the muscle along with the ligaments, the muscle along with the tendon working together in a unit. And so what we want to do is strengthen the part of the unit that's going to support and calm down the overcharged, the overloaded, loose tissue
Mhm.
that is too flexible.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So,
Mhm.
of course, I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to end on one question that I ask everybody that I interview. And so I'm going to throw out a question to you and see what your answer is. I love everybody's always got a great one for me. So, the question is if you could tell somebody something that you know that most people don't know anything about, but if they did, it may very well change the entire course of their lives and improve their life from once they hear it, what is it?
Oh, whenever you find yourself feeling defensive or angry, switch to being curious. And as soon as you switch defensive into, that's interesting. What wonder what made you say that? Or wonder why I responded that way. You put a space between the stimulus and response. And in that space, love can flow and forgiveness and understanding. And your life will change.
It's so well said. I mean, I think that's the thing that most people are too reactive. You're right. It's, learning how to be the observer in the process of observation on something that's being observed. So just taking that little separation, I think that's
Going up on the ceiling, I say.
exactly. Just look
One to
down on the
watch.
situation.
Watch the situation as it's unfolding. Yeah.
It's just such a great one. I love that one. I think that's definitely a good one. I hope everybody hears that. So, Carol, if somebody wants to learn a little bit more about your work, to find you, to learn a little bit more, what's the easiest way to connect with Carol Davis?
Well, directly through my email, cmdavis, cm as in Marjorie Davis at miami.edu. That's my email. But I also have a YouTube channel where some of my talks can be found. It's capital D, Dr. C.M. Davis. They gave me that. I didn't choose it, but they gave it to me. And if you go on YouTube and then type in capital D, Dr. C.M. Davis, videos will come up where I explain my perspective about manual therapy and fascia and biotensegrity and energy.
And it's such a great perspective indeed. I mean, always so much to learn from you, just such an incredible educator and so clear. I'm so excited to see you guys this coming weekend in the Fascia Congress or the Breckenridge Fascia Symposium, right? And looking forward to listening to everybody share new insights, perhaps, as well as to refine things that I've perhaps heard many times, but I'm looking forward to it. And for those of you who are going to miss this, because by the time this video comes out, this event will probably be
Over.
done.
Mhm. But the videos will be on https www.thefasciahub.com. The
Yes.
Fascia Hub. You can find the videos there from the Fascia Symposium and lots of other videos that are very helpful from people in the community teaching about fascia and movement and manual therapy.
Yeah, what a great pursuit that is. I mean, Jen's just done such a great way to get fascia out there to more people and educate people. So,
Right.
well, Carol, thank you again so much for being on Anatomical Gangster. And for those of you guys listening, if you've enjoyed this conversation, make sure that you subscribe to the page and share this with your friends, even if they aren't in the fascial world or the scientific community. I think this information is good for all hearts and all minds. Thanks again for
Thank
joining
you,
us.
Sue. Thanks for
Thank
having
you,
me.
Carol.
Mhm. Bye.